All right. Hello and welcome back to the 101 Fantasy Football Show on YouTube. My name is Sawyer and I am your host, and I'm excited to get another divisional breakdown and dynasty outlook done for the day. Um, what we've done so far, if you've been following the series, we've got the AFC East done, we've got the AFC North done. So, going through what those teams look like for this upcoming season, as well as taking a look at kind of what the contract situations are with the teams and what the dynasty outlook might be for some of these players. And so today, we're going to be jumping into the AFC South. We got a new division on deck. We got the Houston Texans, we got the Indianapolis Colts, Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Tennessee Titans. So I'm excited to get into it. I hope you are as well. We've got some exciting pieces to talk about in terms of fantasy players, as well as we have probably my favorite player at his value for both redraft and dynasty that we're going to be talking about on today's show. So I'm pretty excited to jump into it. But just before we do, I want you to just go check out my Twitter at Sawyer_FF if you like the content that I'm putting out. All of my projections are posted on there first. I've got all my rankings posted on there, both for redraft and dynasty. It really helps me out. I also throw some tidbits out there of just things I find during my research. So if you can go check it out over there, interact with me on Twitter. I'd love to interact with you guys, answer your questions. And as the following grows, hopefully I can get more polls and interactive things going on over there. So just wanted to put that in there. If you want to go check it out, that's at Sawyer_FF. But without further ado, let's just jump into the video and talk about the AFC South. So here you're just seeing my overall rankings, but we're going to start off with the Houston Texans. So let's head over there. And here's what we got. So with the Houston Texans this year, things are looking a bit different with the offense because, well, when you think of the Houston Texans offense for the past 5 years, it's been, DeAndre Hopkins and then Deshaun Watson passing to DeAndre Hopkins in the last few seasons. But that's changed this year because DeAndre Hopkins, he's been traded, in case you didn't know, and you're living under a rock for the offseason. DeAndre Hopkins is now a Cardinal, and Deshaun Watson really is left with no alpha target to suck up 25+% of the target share this season. And as a result, I think there is a lot of questions about what is this offense actually going to look like for this year. So let's do our best to break this down and look at what it's going to be. So starting with the quarterback position, we have Deshaun Watson, a guy that a lot of people are lower on now. And I think I'm roughly around the consensus ranking. However, I don't think Deshaun Watson's a guy you need to be avoiding by any means in your draft. And here's why. Last season, Deshaun Watson had obviously DeAndre Hopkins, and DeAndre Hopkins soaked up a ton of targets. However, this season, with him gone, Deshaun Watson is still a very good and talented quarterback. I actually trust Deshaun Watson a lot. I think since he's entered the league, although he's young, he's now probably one of the top 5 to 10 quarterbacks in the league. I think I would have him in my top 5, arguably, I guess, at this point, right around that 5 spot as a pure talent quarterback in the NFL. And I trust him to get the job done this year. And so what I think we're going to see is, although he doesn't have that alpha target, I don't think I have any player on this team projected for over a 20% target share. I think he has the ability to spread the ball around and just read the play. He can extend plays. He's shown that plenty of times. And he's going to be able to get the job done by just utilizing all the players that are on the field and just finding the open player, the best player to throw to on any given play. And as a result, I think we're going to see a decent amount of fantasy production from Deshaun Watson for this year. I think losing Hopkins does limit his ceiling. I don't think you're going to I don't think this season you're going to get the QB1 performance from Deshaun Watson. I don't think he's going to end up being the number 1 guy in redraft leagues. However, I do have, if you see here, him projected for a similar projections. I mean, very, very close actually when it comes to total fantasy points to what he had last year. And so as a result, I think he's a guy you can be locking up. He's probably a middling quarterback 1, but a guy that I'm willing to target in that. He's at the back end of the top tier, but I would still say he's in that, second tier behind Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. Then it's the tier where I would have Deshaun Watson in. So a guy I think you can still be trusting in fantasy football this season. At the running back position, we have the 2 Johnsons. And I think David Johnson has been a bit polarizing because I think there's a lot of people that think, well, he just hasn't been healthy, but he's actually a super talented back. You go look and you've seen what he's done. He's been a top. I mean, there was a time when he was considered maybe the best and back in the league, or at least for fantasy football, because he had the ability to go for 1,000 yards rushing and receiving, and so or the potential to. So I think there's people that are still hanging on to that and saying he'll be awesome this year, and then there's people that are looking at that video where he looks just like a dump truck behind the offensive line and he gets absolutely blown up, and saying, he's a wash. He's a wash. But I think this year, with him going to Houston, change of scenery, Bill O'Brien paid DeAndre Hopkins for him. Obviously, it looked like a ridiculous trade. I still believe it was lopsided no matter what David Johnson is going to do this year. I still think it's somewhere in the middle. Like, David Johnson isn't what he used to be. He's also not a terrible, terrible talent. And he also has the ability to still run and receive in an offense where Bill O'Brien is going to try to make good on his trade and make himself look like he didn't just make a buffoon move. And so as a result, I think we're going to see a lot of David Johnson. I think David Johnson has some talent and he'll still get his role. However, I think, over 200 carries for sure for David Johnson, at least 40 to 50 targets his way, and a guy who's going to be roughly around like that back end RB2 for you for fantasy for the upcoming season. And so, that's what I'm seeing. I think when the trade happened, Bill O'Brien said, please just give it time. Don't just jump to conclusions and say it was a terrible, terrible deal till you see what happens on the field. I think what that translates to is I'm gonna use David Johnson as much as possible just to try to prove myself right. And so I do think we're gonna get to see a lot of David Johnson on the field this year. And as a result, a guy who I think you can be using as at least a volume floor play in redraft this year. Now the receiver room. This is a tough one because a lot of people seem to be all in on one of the two, whether it's Will Fuller or Brandon Cooks. It seems like there is the Will Fuller believers that are saying now that DeAndre is gone, he's a wide receiver too. And then there's the Cooks believers who say, well, you look at what Cooks has been before. He's been a wide receiver one in seasons. He's finished in the wide receiver one category before, and he's very good. He tends to not have to, for some reason, when he joins a new offense, he doesn't have that kind of knockoff. He's always very, very good in his first season in a new offense. So let's all buy into Brandon Cooks. And I'm somewhere in the middle, and I'll explain why. When you have an offense who has good fourth and fifth receivers, like Kenny Stills and Kiki QT, and you have a quarterback who doesn't have a number one guy who's going to hog the football like they did with DeAndre Hopkins. But something I hinted at with Watson is that then they're going to just spread the ball around, right? And that's what I was saying with Watson. He's just going to find the best player who's open on any given play. And as a result, even the fourth and fifth receivers, they're going to get on the field because Kenny Stills is a very similar skill set to Cooks and Fuller. He's still pretty solid as a player. Kiki QT might still see the field a bit and get a little bit of targets. And those do suck targets away from those top end guys on the team. So I actually don't think it's going to be Will Fuller or Brandon Cooks blowing up. I just think both of them are going to be like wide receiver threes or flex plays this year, just because I don't think Deshaun Watson's really going to just zone in on one. It might just be Will Fuller one game, Brandon Cooks the next. And as a result, they're not guys I think you need to be targeting for this year because they're both going to be big play type guys. Neither one's going to have tons and tons of volume. And so you're going to need to pick right on any given week. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe one goes down and the other one goes off. Maybe one does just become dominant, but that's how I see it. And so I think actually where they're being priced, it's pretty fair and not guys that I'm actually thinking you have to go out of your way to target in your drafts. Randall Cobb, I'll also mention him. He'll get his in the slot. If you're playing in a PPR league, he might be a guy you can use in a pinch, but not overly sexy for the upcoming year. At the tight end position, this is a tight end room I'm just really not excited about. Darren Fells, Jordan Akins, I don't think they're going to be guys that you're going to use really at all this year. Maybe one of them takes over the job and really gets full grasp on it. But you even look at last year, like Darren Fells was the guy to have in fantasy, but it was only because of the touchdowns. He had 7 touchdowns. He only had 48 targets. On the flip, Jordan Akins only had 2 touchdowns, but he had 55 targets. And so it's too hard to predict. On top of these two, Jordan Thomas is having a good camp. And the guy that I like the most here is Kahale Warring. So I just think it's a messy room. I'd rather leave those guys on the wire, and if one of them breaks out, go take your shot at trying to pick them up. But you have better options for sure at the tight end position. So what does this look like for my projections and my rankings? Deshaun Watson, I have him pretty much at consensus. Like I said, he's going to be a solid middling quarterback, and I think he won't have the ceiling, but he'll have still a very good floor because he's just a good quarterback. At the running back position, David Johnson, pretty fairly priced. I'm a little bit higher than consensus, but only slightly. And the reason being, like I said, I think he's going to get volume. Bill O'Brien doesn't want to look like a goof. He understands, he knows, he's heard the community thinks he made a stupid trade. And so as a result, he's going to use David Johnson. And I think we're going to see a good enough season to provide RB2 numbers. Duke Johnson, I'm slightly higher on just because I still believe in the talent of Duke Johnson. I do think he'll get on the field a bit. And when targets are vacated, we've seen they go to the running back. So I think there still will be a good amount of targets for both David and Duke Johnson for that upcoming year. The receiver position, Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, I'm a little bit lower than consensus, but as I said, they're pretty fairly priced. Randall Cobb, again, same thing. And Kenny Stills, just leave him on the wire. You won't need him unless Fuller or Cooks go down. Tight ends, we've already talked about it. Avoid and see if one of them breaks out. So what does the dynasty look like then for this team? It's pretty interesting because you've got Deshaun Watson. After this year, I know there's people saying, he's going to be gone. He's going to go somewhere else after his contract. He's not going to sign with Houston. But that's all speculation, and it's too hard to speculate when there's really no grounds to speculate on. And so I would say for the foreseeable future, we have to expect Deshaun Watson to be at the helm of the Houston Texans. And that makes him a solid, but probably not elite fantasy quarterback option for your dynasty. The running back position, treat them both like rentals, the way I see it. I mean, you look at what's going to happen this offseason. There's so many good free agent running backs. There will be good rookie running backs. There is every single year. This year, it looks like there's going to be at least 3 solid rookie running backs and potentially more. And so the way I see it with Houston is that Duke Johnson has no guaranteed money. There's a chance he's gone. David Johnson, they're paying, yes, but if they bring in a rookie, the rookie comes in on a cheap deal. They still only pay about $10 million to their backs in a season, and there's a good chance that David Johnson as a 29-year-old just not going to be solid enough, or his body's not going to hold up, and they're going to end up using that rookie as the main guy. So treat both David Johnson and Duke Johnson like one-year rentals in Dynasty, and maybe you get lucky, maybe they maintain their roles next season. But if you've treated it like a one-year thing, I'm pretty sure you can get them in a trade, treating them like a one-year rental. You're best off planning around it that way. The receivers, it's Brandon Cooks. I mean, the potential out after this season is $0. They pay nothing in dead cap because he has no guarantees after this. So, I mean, I would again treat Cooks and Fuller both like they're on one-year deals right now. One of them will be here next year, whether it's Cooks or Fuller. They play a similar role. I expect one to stay in Houston. I think Cobb, they've paid him. He's going to be in the slot. And the other guy to take a look at is Isaiah Coulter, their 5th-round rookie from this past draft. And the reason is, although he's not huge, I believe he's 6'1", 6'2", and about 190. His biggest strength in college was his contested catch ability and his ability to high point the ball, and he has good hands. And so, yeah, and he doesn't create a lot of separation, although he's athletic. But he's kind of that big body type of receiver, the guy who can play that X role. And I don't think Cooks or Fuller are really that guy. I think both of them are more of a Z. And so as a dynasty stash, I think it's worthwhile to put Coulter on your taxi squad, hold him on your bench, see what happens this year, see what usage he gets. You have next offseason to see what hype he gets in that offseason before you have to make a decision whether you're going to cut him or keep him. I think he's a guy worth stashing and keeping your eyes on. So Isaiah Coulter, keep your eyes on him because there's a chance he actually carves out a good role in this Texans offense. The tight ends, Fells and Akins, like I said, they're not great for this year. I'd avoid them. The guy that I like here is Cahill Waring. He was a 3rd-round pick last year. He's athletic. He was injured for the whole season, so he missed the year. But there's a chance this year or next year he can kind of take over that role and become the starting tight end. Deshaun Watson used his tight ends last year, 9 touchdowns to his tight ends last year. So if Cahill Waring can get that job, he would be a useful tight end in fantasy football, I believe. So that's the Texans. Let's jump over to the next team, the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts. They're a tough team for me this year because I like parts and I really don't like parts, but Frank Reich seems to talk like all of the parts are going to be awesome. Like Jonathan Taylor will be great. Marlon Mack will be the starter. Nyheim Hines will be like Danny Woodhead, and there'll be games he gets 10 targets, but also Michael Pittman is going to be a great X receiver. Paris Campbell is going to get tons of work in the slot. It feels like every single player Frank Reich is saying is going to have an awesome year. So you kind of have to sift through that coach speak to figure out what's actually going to happen. And I think when I look at what's going to happen is that this team is going to be a run-heavy team. And Phillip Rivers is kind of a wash. He's not much better than Jacoby Brissett at this point in his career. No disrespect. He's had a great career. But at this point, he doesn't have much left in the tank. And there's not going to be a lot of passing volume in this offense to go around. And so as a result, starting with the quarterback position, I'm out on Phillip Rivers this year. If you're in a super flex league and you want to have a third quarterback who you know at least is a starter, go ahead. You can pick him up as your bench guy, but that's the only place I'm drafting Rivers this year or having him on my team. Let's jump to the receivers now, just because we're kind of talking about that idea. T.Y. Hilton, he'll still get a good target share, but even if you're getting a high percentage of a small pie, you're not getting a ton of targets. And so 124 targets is what I've got him projected for. It's going to give him decent numbers on the year. I've got him for 80 receptions. He's over 1,000 yards. 180 half PPR fantasy points is solid, but those are closer to wide receiver 3 numbers than they are wide receiver 2 numbers. And at his age, too, with his injury history, he's not a guy that I think you need to overly be targeting. I think there's guys in the range that you could be drafting him that'll give you more upside. So I'm not super in on Hilton, but at his price, I think he's worth his price, but not a guy you should be reaching on beforehand. And normally there will be guys that I like more that are in that same range. Behind him, Pittman and Campbell. Lots of hype for both these guys, and I do like them both for Dynasty. I'm a fan of Pittman and his ability to develop into a good X receiver. I think Paris Campbell has a lot of juice out of the slot, but I just don't think there's going to be a ton of work because it's like I said, it's in a low pass volume system this year, and neither one are proven. So this season, I would be not avoiding, but I don't think either one are anything more than like just very late round flyer picks who you're hoping to get something out of in the first few weeks. So for me, 50-ish targets each, 178 fantasy points and half PPR is just not great. So yes, take a shot on them maybe, but I would say don't expect a ton from either of these guys in 2020. Tight ends. Here is the one place I'm a little bit optimistic because Phillip Rivers does love his tight ends. Tight ends generally don't have a far ADOT, so average depth of target, and Jack Doyle himself doesn't have a high or far ADOT. So I do think Doyle will get a good amount. They lose Eric Ebron. They bring in Trey Burton. Burton's a downgrade on Ebron, so Doyle really is the guy at tight end to catch passes. So I do think you can take Doyle in a tight end premium league and get solid production. I don't think he's a starter. He's not in my top 12, but as a guy who can come in on a good situation or matchup, come in on a bye week, he's a solid enough pick there. And then let's go to the position that I'm actually excited about for the Colts, because I did say there was some good and some bad, and I've talked a lot of the bad, but here is the good with the Colts. The Colts have a great offensive line. The Colts are going to want to run the ball. They have a couple of good pieces in their backfield, and you can actually probably find value in all 3 of these pieces, and I'll explain how. First off, Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is a rookie. He has had some fumbling issues in college, but he was the best pure runner in the draft. I had him actually rated as the 4th best rookie running back for fantasy football, although I did have him as the best pure runner. And so he comes into this system where I think it's actually one of, if not the best fit for him and his skill set. And that is going to be kind of like what we saw with Zeke Elliott and the Dallas Cowboys, and maybe not to the same extent, because when Zeke came in, he came in as like the 4th overall pick. He was going to be the guy from day one. Taylor, 2nd round pick. They have a 1,000-yard rusher on the team already in Marlon Mack. They are showing some respect to him, but I think what you're going to get from Taylor is starting the year with like 10 carries, but developing that role as long as he doesn't have those fumble issues, because sometimes that can keep a guy off the field depending on the coaching staff. But if he can keep his ball security in check, I think by the time they hit their bye week, week 6, coming out of that, I think you could be seeing 15 carries a game for Taylor and a guy that you can be relying on as an RB2. And so that's where the value is. If you choose to draft him, keep that in mind. When he isn't doing great, or if he isn't doing great in those first few weeks, please don't trade him. Wait till after their bye week. see what happens, because the way they might treat this without preseason is like Marlon Mack's the starter for the first 5, and Taylor's going to get a little bit of touches, and it's going to be just like his trial period. He's going to get a few games in, understand it, then he's going to have this time off where they're going to, okay, now we're going to ramp you up, and coming out of the bye, you're going to be the guy. So keep that in mind if you're drafting him. Don't trade him until after the bye week, unless, if he ends up having immense weeks, you can consider trading him because the hype around him will be super high. But if you're drafting him and he isn't producing early, hold him till at least after the bye week and see how his utilization changes after the bye. Marlon Mack, I think he's going in the 8th round right now. They're saying he's the starter right now. Frank Reich respects him as the starter right now. He's going to get a fair share of carries. This team is going to have like 30 carries a game. Phillip Rivers cannot run the ball. Nyheim Hines won't get a lot of touches. It's going to be Taylor and Mack. And so I think if you are looking for a guy, especially in those first few weeks, because their schedule is not overly challenging in the first few weeks, in the 8th round you can start. I'd go grab Mack. I actually have him in a couple leagues. I'm going to start him week 1. They're playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team who I have as the 2nd worst rushing defense for the upcoming season. And I'm willing to start him there, even if it's 15 touches, even if it's 12 or 13 touches. He will be explosive enough in that game, I believe, to be worth the start. And a guy who you can flex in a pinch, or if Taylor goes down, or if Taylor's fumble issues are really a thing, or I mean, we've seen this before with rookies. They just don't transition well maybe at the start of the season. They're just adjusting to the NFL. Marlon Mack is a guy who's proven to be a 1,000-yard rusher before, and at the price you're getting him, he's worth that value. And finally, Nyheim Hines, a guy who's not going to run the ball, but if you're looking at PPR, like Frank Reich has worked in his system, and Phillip Rivers, where Danny Woodhead was awesome because he could receive. I think Nyheim Hines is actually going to be one of the primary targets in this offense. I think we're going to see sometimes where they utilize Hines on the field with Mack or Taylor, just because it will give them that dual threat. Teams won't know, okay, Taylor's on the field, they could slam it down our throats, but Nyheim Hines is also there. They could catch out of the backfield. Makes it hard to figure out what they're going to do. So I think there's ways where they're going to get both these guys on the field at a time, whether it's Mack and Hines or Taylor and Hines. And in PPR leagues, I think you're actually going to get some value out of Hines as well. And so how does this all shake out? You'll see my values. I'm lower on Rivers. I'm kind of out on these receivers. I think Hilton is fairly priced, like I said, but there's probably going to be guys in that range that I prefer more that I will be drafting. Pittman and Campbell I'm lower on because it feels like at these prices, people are just taking the chance on Pittman or Campbell. I have Pittman for a little bit more fantasy points, hence why I say Pittman's worth the value. Campbell isn't. But you could take a shot on either guy, but please don't do it till late in your drafts. Jack Doyle, he's going to be a solid tight end. I think he's going to just be, a tight end 2 on your team. You can plug and play when needed. But the running backs, that's where the value is. Taylor being fairly priced. Mack, I'm higher than consensus on him. And Hines, I'm higher than consensus on. So, I think the value with the Colts comes in the run game. But let's take a look at the dynasty aspect because there's a bit more here. So Rivers, I think this is last year. He's going to be gone. So it could be Eason. I should have had Brissett on here as well. Could be Brissett. But the pieces that are exciting, no matter who the quarterback situation is, they're going to figure that out. We don't really know who it's going to be. The pieces that are exciting, though, is Jonathan Taylor. Marlon Mack's gone after this year. And so as much as I like Mack for this season, and I am a Mack truther, I believe in the talent of Marlon Mack, he'll be gone. He's not coming back. And so Jonathan Taylor, 4 years left. After this year, he'll still have 3 years left on that rookie deal. He's going to be the guy, and I would say it's a pretty much a lock to me that once Mack is gone, Taylor immediately jumps into the RB1 conversation as a top 12 guy, and a guy that if you have in Dynasty, it always feels like you're paying a lot for rookies, but drafting rookies is the best place to find value because once he gets into that top echelon, those guys start to be worth 2 first-round picks or sometimes 3. I mean, look at McCaffrey. I don't even know if you can get McCaffrey for 3 first-round picks. I'm pretty sure in my leagues you wouldn't be able to do that. So, the value is just only going to rise as Matt goes. So Taylor, a guy I love in Dynasty. Hines, he'll maintain his role next year, I think. But without Rivers, it's hard to tell how many targets he'll get because Rivers loves to dump it off to the backs. Tight ends, nothing really special, but the receivers is where there's some value. As much as I don't love Pittman or Campbell for this year, Hilton could be gone after this next season. We're not sure. I know he wants to come back, but Indianapolis hasn't given him, or they haven't had contract negotiations really yet. And so Pittman and Campbell. Pittman, I think, as a talent, I like him a lot as a prospect. I don't know how he's going to do this season, but in the going forward, I know they love him. They think he can be the X receiver. I think he can be an X receiver and develop into like somewhat lower volume, but a guy who can run routes as a big target, but also win contested catches, kind of like a Kenny Golladay. So I'm a big fan of Pittman for Dynasty. Paris Campbell as well. I mean, Paris Campbell could become the next T.Y. Hilton on this team. Yes, he's not as good of a route runner yet, and he's not nearly as polished as Hilton is yet. However, athletically, and some of the abilities that he's flashed are similar, and so they could develop him into the Z role, similar to what they have Hilton doing, playing some slot, some outside. And Pittman and Campbell could be really the big two receivers here in Indianapolis. So both guys, I think I'd be willing to take a chance on in dynasty leagues. So there's the Colts. Let's jump on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Okay, so when you have a team like this, I believe the Jags are going to be very bad this year. I think they potentially have the worst defense in the league at the moment. And offensively, they don't have a ton of pieces. And so when you have a team like this, they're going to be chasing a lot, and that results in a lot of passing and not a lot of running. And so you're going to see that reflected in the way that I value this team. So Gardner Minshew, I think he gets the chance this year. He was actually very good last year. His numbers were actually quite similar to that of Kyler Murray, who's getting tons and tons of love right now. And I'm not saying the two are the same. I'm just saying Gardner Minshew will get the opportunity. And last year, he actually produced in decent amounts. And so I think he's a guy you can be targeting, especially in super flex leagues. I'd be looking at him. He's a competitive guy. He's a gamer. He actually looked fairly athletic last year in escaping the pocket and being able to pick up some rushing yards as well. And so I like Gardner Minshew as, I think I'm higher than the community as like a middling quarterback too, but a guy who they're just going to be forced to pass the ball a lot. And so even on a bad team, there's going to be passing volume for Minshew, and I think he can be successful with it. The running back position. Leonard Fournette. The community is really a mixed bag on Fournette this year. Just even looking at Twitter these last few days, I've been seeing Fournette is still an RB1. Why are we knocking him so much? But I don't have him there, and I'll explain why I don't. When we look for top-end running backs, generally speaking, the top 10 guys come from high-scoring offenses. The Jacksonville Jaguars are not that this year. They're going to need to pass the ball a lot. They're going to be behind in games a lot. There's just not going to be a lot of opportunity to run the football. Leonard Fournette is a good runner of the football. I believe he still has talent carrying the ball. But what he doesn't have is receiving ability. Last year, the reason he was so high in the running back rankings was because he had 100 targets. And yes, I know touchdown regression. He only had 3 last year. I do have him up to 7 this year. But I still, like I said, I don't think they're going to be in the goal line situations a lot to hammer the ball in. So I don't think he's going to get like 10 or 15. So despite that, I did want to point that out. Okay, I have the touchdowns up. But last year, the reason he was so good was those targets, 100 targets. This season, Gruden comes in as the coach. Gruden comes from Washington, where he utilized a receiving back. That receiving back was Chris Thompson. So who do they bring in? They bring in Chris Thompson. Chris Thompson knows the system they're going to be playing. Gruden will use Chris Thompson because he always has. And as a result, I have Thompson for 56 receptions across 12 games just because he never seems to have a full season. But that leaves only roughly 40 targets for Leonard Fournette. And when you take 60 targets away, like every reception is worth about 3 carries in fantasy football. That's huge. Those targets coming away are huge. I know these are running backs we're talking about, and a lot of times with running backs we like to look at, well, does he run the ball a lot or does he not run the ball a lot? But those targets are they're triple the value of the carries. And so without the targets, I don't think Leonard Fournette gives you RB1 numbers. I think he'll be like a back-end RB2. If Thompson goes down, you'll see some more productive games from Fournette, and I'm sure he'll have some blow-up games. But he's a guy that I think for 2020, I think there's better guys in that range. Let's just put it that way. There's guys who I think are a better value at the price that you'd be paying, and so I'm off on Fournette. Thompson, like I mentioned, in PPR, you might be able to get something out of him, but only as a late round flyer guy. And Rock Armstead, treat him as the handcuff to Fournette. That's all he really is right now. But in Dynasty, we'll talk about him in a minute. Receivers. Okay, we've made it to the part of the show where I gush over a player because DJ Chark is my favorite player for 2020 fantasy football as well as Dynasty because simply he's just not being priced the way he should be. And so you can get him at a value. I mean, DJ Chark, he's 23 years old. He was a second-round pick who is super athletic and actually developed in his route running last year. But let's take a look at the numbers because Chark, playing from weeks 1 through 14, that's pretty much the whole season, was the wide receiver 8 in half PPR. He was dominant. Then he gets hurt in week 14. He misses week 15. He comes back not fully healthy for week 16 and 17, doesn't put up great numbers, but in the box score then, it looks like he played 15 games and didn't finish as a wide receiver 1 in those 15 games. And people get so caught up in, oh, was he a wide receiver 1 or was he a wide receiver 2? But I believe he was the wide receiver 13, which is one spot out. But weeks 1 through 14, he was the wide receiver 8, which is just amazing production given the fact that you can buy him right around wide receiver 20 in both Dynasty and redraft right now. I'm a huge fan. They don't bring anyone else in to replace him. If anything, Laviska Shenault is a perfect complement to him as an underneath kind of multifaceted type of player, while Chark can continue to develop into that X role. He has chemistry with Gardner Minshew. I've got Chark statted out to be roughly around, I believe, wide receiver like 14, which we'll talk about a little bit. I'll be able to show you exactly where I have him in different places. But for me, smash the draft button. I think you can get Chark in the 4th round right now. Smash that draft button there. I'm a huge fan, and I think you're going to get tons of production from him this season, especially if they're down. They're going to need to pass the ball, like I said. And who's going to be the best beneficiary of that? It's going to be DJ Chark. So whether it's Gardner Minshew or, in the future, more years down the line, it's someone else, whether they could draft Justin Fields, they could draft Trey Lance, they could draft Trevor Lawrence. But whoever it is, Chark is a talented receiver. And I think at his price right now he's a screaming buy. Beyond him for 2020, yeah, that's about how I feel about it. I mean, I wouldn't draft Dede. It's a slot guy, maybe in PPR leagues, but he doesn't have a ton of upside. Conley, again, not a lot of upside. Laviska, don't think there's going to be enough of a role because he's going to, Dede's got the slot locked down. Chark is the guy. Conley, Keelan Cole, Laviska Shenault, they're all kind of competing for the same job. So I would really kind of avoid all these guys for redraft beyond Chark. But like I said, smash the draft button on Chark. Tight ends, Eifert, he's okay. In a pinch, if you need to stream him. Doesn't probably need to be rostered. And Josh Oliver, a rookie that I like as a Dynasty guy, but not really for redraft. So as I mentioned, let's take a look at kind of how I compare to the consensus then. Higher on Gardner Minshew, which I've explained why. A bit lower on Fournette and higher on Thompson. Again, it's the receptions. Those receptions are so valuable that I think you have to keep that in mind when deciding if you're going to draft Fournette or not. Chark, okay, 13, 15, and 15. So 13 in standard, 15 in half, and 15 in PPR. I think 15 is his floor. Even if we're saying 20 is his floor, you are drafting him at his very bare floor with the ceiling of being a top 5 guy. I believe that fully. I think he can finish in the top 5 this year. He's that good. And there's no one else there. It makes so much sense to me why Chark is going to be a beast this season. And if I haven't convinced you yet, then I guess you're just never going to be converted onto the Chark train. But I'm fully on board. Dede Westbrook and Chris Conley, I am higher than consensus because I've statted them for higher. But like I said with them, they don't have a ton of upside, so I don't think they're guys you need to be drafting at that point. You might want to be drafting guys with a bit more upside, like a Pittman who has a chance to maybe develop a bigger role. And Laviska, probably going to avoid for this year. Eifert as well, leaving him on the wire. So what is the Dynasty outlook? Gardner Minshew, they don't owe him a lot of money. And so for him, it's really, this is his prove it year. Either he earns the job or they're gonna be bad. And when they're bad, if they go 2-14, he wasn't good enough. But that also means they have a chance to get Trevor Lawrence, who could be amazing. I'm not gonna he looks great right now, I'm not going to say he's, the next GOAT, but he could be very, very good. And he looks like a great quarterback prospect, but so do Fields and Lance. So either way, Minshew has to basically win games to avoid the team from being in a position to draft them, or else I think they would draft one of those guys. At the running back position, Fournette, he's gone after this year. He's one of those guys in that RB pool that we were talking about. And so for Dynasty, he's a tough buy because I don't think you're actually going to get a ton of great value from him this year. And so I wouldn't be buying him at the start of this year because part of kind of what you're buying into then is that he'll be good this season. But I think if he's having a bad season, it's the middle of the season and his price is down because someone's scared of him becoming a free agent too. I think then maybe is the best window to be buying on Fournette, just because I think I think he has talent. I don't think he's a bad guy. I think a lot of the publicity out of Jacksonville kind of rubs him the wrong way and makes us not like him as a player. But I think he's a good talent still. I mean, I still believe in his rushing ability, not his receiving ability, but his rushing ability. And I don't think he has as many off the field issues as it may seem. And so I think he's a decent buy if you can get him at a good price mid-season. But that's kind of how I feel about him. Rock Armstead, keep an eye on him because, like I said, Fournette's gone. They didn't pick up the option. There is a chance, although it may be slim, but you look at like Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones continues to get hype, yet every offseason it feels like people are saying, oh, they're going to bring someone in, they're going to bring someone in. And they always, actually, no, the year before they just didn't bring anyone in. It was him and Peyton Barber. And then this year they bring in guys, but it's Keyshawn Vaughn and LaShawn McCoy. They didn't bring in like a big fish. And so Raquel Armstead, you can get him for super cheap. He could have a chance. He could get that opportunity to be the guy next year when Fournette's gone. So just keep that in mind. If you can pick him up for like a third or fourth round pick, I think it's probably worth it. The receivers, Chark, like I said, slam the draft button on him. Laviska, I like him. I think he's a decent prospect, and given his skill set with Gruden, I think they're going to be able to figure out ways to use him. The NFL is trying to become more adapt to using their gadget type of players to get more volume out of them as well. And so I think Laviska can develop into a solid second receiver in this offense behind Chark. I don't think he'll ever be your wide receiver one, but he could in Dynasty become that wide receiver 2-3 for fantasy. And I think that's solid out of Laviska. So a guy who I'm okay with drafting. The other guy I want to mention is Colin Johnson, just because the guy's immense. He's 6'5", 6'6". However, the problem with Colin Johnson earning a role is that, DJ Chark, as long as he's there, Chark is the X. Laviska is the higher prospect who can fit more of that Z and slot role. And so Colin Johnson, it's going to be tough for him to find the types of valuable targets, like those red zone targets. But we'll see if he can get there. He might be worth a taxi squad stash. Tight ends, Oliver's a good prospect. Not much else to say. I mean, don't draft Eifert really unless you need a bench stash. And Josh Oliver, he's solid as a decent flyer tight end. But the problem for him has just been health. So we'll see if he can figure that out and stay healthy this year. So the last team I want to talk about is the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans. So something I mentioned with Houston is that the Houston Texans will have to spread the ball around, and as a result, it's going to minimize some of the upside of those top-end guys. The Tennessee Titans are the exact opposite of that exact concept. And so Tannehill, I think he'll be okay this year. I just wanted to throw out there that, yes, last year, his touchdown percentage was 7.69%. So although at the end of the season it felt like Tannehill is a god, he is now a top 10 fantasy quarterback. I believe that he is not that. In three of his 4 seasons in Miami, he was between quarterback 16 and 24. Last year, I think, was a bit of an outlier. I think this year he returns to that quarterback 16 to 24. That's really all I have to say about him. He's going to give you a solid floor. He's a solid super flex type of pickup. But, other than that, he's going to be a streamer in redraft leagues that are one quarterback. But what I was saying is the top end guys, when there's no one behind you, you just get those added targets. And so although, maybe 20 to 30 targets to receiver number 4 doesn't feel like a lot, when you add 10 of those then onto the top end guy and he goes from like 110 to 120, those make an impact. And so something you're going to see here is all of these top end players in Tennessee I'm higher on because there's just no one else to be on the field. They're going to be on the field all the time. They're going to get all the work. There's going to be none of these like smaller guys chipping away at their production. And I think that is like one of the most subtle ways to find value in fantasy that no one talks about. And so with Derrick Henry, I mean, at this point, no matter who's behind him, he is the focal point of this offense. He is a beast of a man. There is no one like him in the NFL right now. I have him for another 300 carries. I have him for another 1,500 yards. I think his floor is like 1,400 yards. His touchdowns, I have him for 14 instead of 16. Oh no, 14 is still quite good. And for me, I think he's a slam dunk RB1 again this season. Draft him with confidence. Darrington Evans, he's going to take over the Dion Lewis role. If something were to happen to Henry, he'll have a role. He'll have a very big role. But until that happens, I mean, he fumbled a couple times the other day in practice. I try not to look too much into that stuff, but normally right now, all players are getting glowing reviews. So when a guy doesn't have a glowing review right now, it's just like, oh, that's strange. Everyone's normally gassing up their rookies. So just a mental note that that's never very good to see in the preseason. But the receivers, one of the biggest polarizing players this year is A.J. Brown, because A.J. Brown was so dang good last year. He was so good as a rookie. And so people, I think at the start of the offseason, it was, let's not overhype him. Let's not overhype him. But now we've done a good job not to. But I think now we're below where we should be on A.J. Brown, because, yes, last year, his yards per reception was 20. And that is not something he will repeat. But although he won't repeat the yards per receptions, even if that's 15 yards per reception, his targets are going up. There's no one else to soak up targets here. So he's going to go over 100 targets. As a result, I have him going up in receptions. So I have him for 18 more receptions. And so even with a lower yards per reception, I still have the yards coming out similarly, the touchdowns coming out the same, and the receptions, if you're in a half-point PPR league or a full PPR league, having more receptions is having more fantasy points. And so I have him slightly above where he was last season, especially in full PPR. And I think he is he can be a very solid wide receiver too, with upside to be a top 10 wide receiver in 2020. I am totally in on the A.J. Brown train. I would not be scared to draft him. I know some people are hesitant because there's not high target volume, but I'm a fan of A.J. Brown for this season because there's no one else. There's just no one else to suck those targets away. Corey Davis, Adam Humphries, you could take a chance on Corey Davis on the same idea. There's no one else there. Adam Humphries, because he's a slot guy, those guys tend to be better for their NFL teams than your fantasy teams. He won't score a lot of touchdowns. Even when he does get the ball, they're going to be shorter receptions than longer. And so if you're going to take a shot on either of these guys, take it on Davis. But then the last guy I want to talk about is Jonnu Smith, because Jonnu Smith, it's the same idea. There's just no one there to take targets. And when you have a guy like Jonnu Smith is actually a freak athlete. Like, they can run the ball with this guy. This guy can break off big runs. He can have run after catch ability that's beastly as a tight end. And those are the types of tight ends you want. A guy who can run up the seam and grab it and carry guys for another 10 yards. So Jonnu Smith, he's one of the guys that I'm looking at to be a breakout tight end this year. I think with Delaney Walker out of the picture, Tennessee does like to throw to the tight end, and Jonnu Smith is the only guy there. I think he is a guy that you can be drafting at a value where he is, and getting a guy who becomes like a top 10 tight end by the end of the season. I'm a big fan of Jonnu Smith for 2020. And so something that you will see, because generally speaking, it sounds like I'm higher on Tennessee, is that, yes, I am. I mean, Tannehill, I'm fairly average on. Derrick Henry, I'm fairly average on, I guess. The running game, I'm average on. But the receivers, A.J. Brown, I've got him 2 ahead in standard, 3 ahead in half, and 1 ahead in full. So I am slightly ahead, I guess, not as much as I feel like I am, but I'm just trying to give you that vote of confidence that, like, you can draft A.J. Brown as a high-end wide receiver 2, or he can be your wide receiver 1 if you've gone RB heavy early. And I think you will be solid with him there. Corey Davis, take the shot on him and his value because there's no one else to take targets. I still believe he has some talent, but we'll just see if that ever pans out for him. Adam Humphries, I'm higher than consensus, but probably don't need to draft him. And Jonnu Smith, I'm higher. Like, I have him as a 8, 10, and 13. That's almost a tight end 1 in every format. The only one not being PPR, but you can get him as your tight end 17. That means you could probably draft Jonnu Smith as your second tight end on most of your teams. And I think you're going to be having a guy who blows up at that price. So that's how I feel about the Titans. In Dynasty, Tannehill's locked up long term. Derrick Henry's locked up long term. I would be in on most of these guys. Like Derrick Henry, I think is going to be solid. Yes, his body's going to take wear and tear, but they just paid him. So I think you can treat him at least like you can at least treat it with, so he has the potential out. So at least 2 years, but something in fantasy is like with running backs, especially, you can only look at like a 2 to 3 year window because running backs, they change so much. And so having term is sometimes more important than having talent. There's a guy, if he has term and opportunity, even if he's not amazingly talented, you want that guy. And Derrick Henry, he is talented. He's very talented, and he has term and he has opportunity. So Derrick Henry, I think he's a great guy to have in Dynasty right now. A.J. Brown, I'm all in. He was my number one wide receiver coming out last year. I unfortunately made the mistake of moving him down when he got drafted by Tennessee. I ended up missing out on him in a lot of my leagues because I had slid him down my draft board because of his situation, and I regret it to this day. So if you can get him in your Dynasty league, pick him up, do it for me. Big fan of A.J. Brown, love his talents, and now the situation as the alpha here. Davis, they declined his 5th year. So, I mean, Davis and Humphreys, they're guys who you could take a shot on. Davis, maybe with a change of scenery, things will go better for him. Humphreys, probably not a guy you're going to need to have on your Dynasty teams. And Jonnu Smith, a guy like I said, I'm a big fan of this year. I think you can get him at a good price right now. And if he blows up, he's a young tight end with a lot of talent who could become a tight end. He could become in the tight end one conversation, not the number one guy, but in the tight end one area. So I'm a guy who I'm looking at for sure in Dynasty. So that's all. That's our 4 teams for the day. This is how they fit into my overall ranking. As you can see, I believe these are all sorted by 6-point touchdowns and then half PPR for all the other categories. So we'll just scroll through. You can see where I have different guys in my rankings. If you enjoyed the video, please, leave a like or subscribe. But for me, the main thing I want to have is just interaction. So if you have any questions for me or comments about it, you can reach out to me on Twitter. Again, that's at Sawyer_FF, or you can just drop a comment below. I'd love to interact with you, answer any questions you have. And I just appreciate you coming by and checking out the video today. So with that said, will be all, and check you next week.